We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Our guest is Clint Kelly, malpractice attorney. Interesting conversation as always with him this morning. It's good to see him. And we got some calls. We're going to jump in first here with Ann. Ann, good morning. How are you, Ann?
I'm good. Good morning. I have two questions. The recent case with the nurse in the medical malpractice, totally agree with everything that happened. But my question is, as a retired nurse, and I've been out for many years, it was extremely difficult, even though I worked in the intensive care unit, to get our hands on the wrong medicine. And I know how the medicine system has developed and the processes that it takes to get your hands on the wrong medicine in a hospital. What has been done to Vanderbilt to make sure that their policies have been reviewed? Because ultimately the medicine has to come from a pharmacy, and ultimately a doctor has to order it, and ultimately it's the nurse that ends up making the mistake. So what my first instinct with Vanderbilt was that they had some problem that assisted this mistake to happen. So what has been done to them since then to improve that this doesn't happen at Vanderbilt again? And secondly, my mother died 20 years ago, and at the time of her death, I knew it was a ruptured bowel, and I knew it was because she had found a doctor that was prescribing medicine, and she kept this to herself. And at the time, she was being given 320 somas a month and over 240 Oxycontin. And when we went to have something done about this physician, because we finally had a name, he traveled all over Nashville as a health coordinator or a food place that sold vitamins on the side, and he didn't lose licenses that prevented him from crossing over into Kentucky and recruiting patients in Kentucky and getting something done about that man, even though we started, and that was our point. We wanted something done to the physician. My mother made her own choices, but she had a doctor that assisted. So what has been done in the last 20 years to make sure that these type of doctors are still not doing what, to make them not be allowable to do this type of thing now?
Okay, it's still happening. Yeah, but
it is. Let me take the second point first. The advent of DEA enforcement of opiates, the opiate settlements, has opened up the box, if you will, to more stringent enforcement of quacks. Okay, and that's what she's talking about. These doctors that prescribe pills, sometimes they are off-brand use of pills. Combining Soma with Oxycontin.
What was the first one?
Soma.
What is that?
Do you remember Soma?
Yeah.
It was a muscle relaxer. It was really hot med for a while until finally the DEA wouldn't allow the sales of it anymore because people were combining it with Oxycontin and other pain relievers and overdosing and dying. Okay, and it was much abused. I don't want to get into the tall weeds of that, but Ann's key question is what's being done. You're seeing more enforcement of that. The problem, Ann, is some of these doctors will close up shop. They were called running pill mills. They'll close up shop in one state and they'll go to another state. And you and I have talked about this before. There's just poor state-to-state enforcement of or communication when one bad doctor migrates to another state. It just is what it is. And until they close that loophole, you're still going to have quacks out there who can move around and do this kind of thing.
There's no national register that lists the names of...
No. You can go to the Department of Health licensure verification site and see if a doctor's been punished somehow or been ordered to pay a judgment to the state for violating rules relating to narcotics use. But again, there's just a lot of migration from state to state that's not monitored.
Would you say, and we'll get to the first question in a moment, would you say that because of the crackdown, DEA and all this, it's made it more difficult for some people who legitimately need these pills to get them?
Oh, I believe that 100%.
Yeah, I've heard from folks.
And it's unfortunate. There is a fine line, I guess, between people who need pain medication who, well, they have a medical need.
Sure.
Versus the DEA saying you can't have it or you can only prescribe so much, and I'm talking about the doctor. How do you find that sweet spot? And I do worry that there are people who have serious needs, cancer patients, for example, who may get shortchanged. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but I do know that there is a great apprehension in the medical community now about prescribing opiates. We see it every day. Go to the emergency room, they're not going to give you maybe 1 or 2 pills.
Used to be different. I mean, probably 10 years ago, I went to the hospital for torn rib cartilage. And they said, oh, that's going to hurt a lot. And yeah, it does. I'd rather have broken ribs than torn cartilage. And they gave me a bottle full of oxycodone. Yeah. And I ended up using just 2 of them and disposed of the rest properly. But now I've heard you go and they may give you 2 pills. And if you need more, I mean, it's not as many. They really are more judicious with how often and how much they prescribe, which I think is a good thing. Yeah. Unless I needed more pills, I guess I'd go back and they'd give me a few more.
I just think doctors are doctors for a reason. Yeah. They are supposed to be the ones, they're on the front line of determining medical need. And there's, like I said, a fine line between giving pain relief while also exposing a patient to the risk of addiction. I know a guy 20 years ago that had shoulder surgery, was given 50 hydrocodone 5, and he took the whole bottle. And then he got it refilled. I'm just talking about routine elbow surgery.
Yeah, see, that's crazy.
And had to go and go to rehab.
Right, because you'll get hooked. And these are good people. They don't realize it. You hear it a lot of times with folks who have back injuries, back pain, because back's awful. And they get these pills, and they get hooked on them. All right, well, the pill mills, we used to do stories all the time on it. We don't do as many. They're still out there, though, right? Can you imagine, as we speak right now, are there some pill mills in Middle Tennessee?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I don't either. I mean, usually we'll go and we'll hear about it. We'll go to a story if there's a raid. Don't hear if it's money.
If you want to investigate this sometime, go look at the pain management centers across the state.
Okay.
The ones like Steve Dickerson. I'm not saying Steve Dickerson's anything wrong, but what I'm talking about is he was in that business. Go look at the pain management business and see how they're running it. Are they running a tight ship?
Yeah.
Or are they running what we used to call a pill mill? Those are the types of situations where you could look into that and see how it's being run.
A pill mill would be where you go back and you're just getting large prescriptions, no questions asked. Maybe you had gotten a 30 supply last week and you're back for another 30 supply a week later.
These weren't, like I said, these weren't pain management centers because those are more regulated. They were run by, like Steve Dickerson was an anesthesiologist. You know, those guys are trained, they know how to handle proper medication usage and needs. What I'm talking about are like the family doctors, the internal medicine doctors, who would set up a shop, say, on the border of Kentucky and West Virginia, bringing in people in the, back injuries, disability patients, and prescribing 120 hydrocodones and come back and see me in a month. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And without a demonstrable need for the medication, other than these people got addicted. 60 Minutes did numerous studies on this, and if you look at the opiate litigation, it's all over the place. So, anyway. Ann's original question, though, is something that I am familiar with, which is what is Vanderbilt doing or not doing? And remember, we've talked about this. There is great angst in the nursing community about the fact they feel like Vanderbilt got a free pass.
Right. Even if you're one of those individuals that felt Redonda Vaught did act inappropriately, and she'd concede that it was a horrible mistake on her part. But there are some out there who, feel that, she did go above and beyond. They still said, okay, part of the problem here was what was happening at Vanderbilt.
Right.
And so you've said before, you think maybe in some ways they were able to avoid this the way she took the brunt of it.
Absolutely. Well, if they weren't prosecuted. And we don't know whether there was a settlement. We presume there was, but that's just an opinion of mine. I don't have other than hearsay, I wouldn't know what to tell you. What I can tell people is Vanderbilt does change policy based on tragic events.
Well, you would hope so.
It's not something they publish. It's not something they're going to go out and tell everybody about. It's done quietly, but it is done. I mean, they're a responsible institution. The problem is, it just is when the policy either is not enforced or they wait too long to change the policy. And I've had cases involving Vanderbilt where policies simply weren't enforced. And people died or got badly injured because of it. So you can have a policy and you can change it, but a policy is no good unless you've got a mechanism in the hospital designed to enforce that policy. Ann's right. Ultimately, it's the nurse's responsibility to get the right medicine to the patient. But if you're not helping the nurse do that job, or what if you're setting that nurse up to fail, which is what the argument was by Nurse Vaught's attorney at the criminal case, then where's the responsibility of the hospital? And that's the problem I have. Is I feel like Vanderbilt Vanderbilt's responsibility in this issue involving the patient should have been made public.
Yeah.
And this should have been explored publicly, and it wasn't. And that's the problem I have with that case.
It was a super high-profile case. Vanderbilt, I guarantee you, I don't know what they're going to say, but they went back and looked at things. Don't you think all hospitals did when they saw this case, to some degree, said, all right, we saw this, let's, is this an outlier, or is this something that we should look at to make sure it doesn't happen to us?
You would hope that they did. I don't have any information.
You're right.
But I do know there's some hospitals that their management system is such that they act like they don't care, even if they do care.
Mm-hmm.
There are other hospitals that are very proactive and try to do the best they can to run a tight ship. And, I know the difference because I know hospitals around here that, act differently under certain situations. The problem I have with hospitals at the end of the day is they keep volume up because they got to make money, and they put doctors and nurses in a situation where the margin for safety is continually shrinking to the point where, like assembly line medicine, they are at the point where they recognize, look, injuries are going to happen, people are going to die, we'll pay the claims and move on.
Yeah. Among the many things I've learned from Clint Kelly over the years is do everything you can to avoid going to the hospital.
That is absolutely true.
You don't want to go. Certainly, sometimes you have to. And if you go to the hospital, they are packed. If you go to any of these hospitals in town, they are jam-packed.
And patients need to understand that when you go to a hospital, and particularly if you have surgery, it's risky.
Yes,
There's no such thing as non-risk procedures, and that's why informed consent is so important. Doctors have a duty by law to inform patients what risks are associated with procedures so that patients make a knowing decision to go into it.
Well, I want to talk more about that. We'll take some calls if they come in, as well as that. Informed consent and how important it is to, at the very least, ask questions. If you have a question or comment, Clint Kelly, if you're talking, you've heard us describe why you may or may not have a case, give us a call right now. Glad to talk to you, walk you through it. We'll be back with more with Malpractice attorney Clint Kelly right after this.
This is a Storm 5 weather.